office. I'm also the chair of the NGO Committee on Human Rights, and this is an NGO Committee on Human Rights event. We have some sort of event every month where we highlight some aspect of human rights. I generally try to carve out time, and this time of year, I usually try to do February, but as the LGBT month, I've been able to achieve that for the past several years. So we're going to have a discussion today, and just to give you a little bit of background, when I got here in 2008, LGBT rights were hardly spoken of at all at the United Nations. It was a very kind of underground topic. There's the Commission on the Status of Women meets in March, and generally there was some discussion on LGBT issues during the Commission on the Status of Women, but that was the only time. The rest of the year, nobody talked about it. And over the past several years, now we're in 2014, this issue has really blossomed here at the United Nations, and there now is Charles Radcliffe and Toiko Klepa are at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and every UN agency now has policy, personnel, and procedures programs dedicated to LGBT rights. So it's been wonderful to see this growth. So we're going to discuss some of the, we've had a lot of progress, let me say that. We've really been going from milestone to milestone in progressing on LGBT rights. Today we're going to talk about some reversals, some things that have happened recently that are kind of pushing us back. It was to be expected. Anytime you have a social justice movement and you're moving forward, you're going to get some pushback. So that's kind of what we're going to be discussing today. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to our moderator, Bobby Nasser. Dr. Bobby Nasser is currently the vice chair of the NGO Committee on Human Rights. She was the chair. I think that we're going to move into a co-chair relationship. She has done some magnificent work in really promoting human rights at the United Nations. And because it wasn't, when she started, even the whole topic of human rights was not being paid serious enough attention across the street until Bobby and the work that she has done over the past many years. So it's really been spectacular. We're very grateful to her for taking over from here.
Well, as you all know, unfortunately, what's been going on in terms of true atrocities, we've been seeing it in the news, and of course there was quite a bit of attention paid to the Olympics, the Winter Olympics in Russia, because there it was, right in our face, how terrible things have been in terms of basic human rights. To allow this level of discrimination is a violation of all our most fundamental human rights, right? So that's why tonight we're having a very important presentation. And we're going to talk about where things have gone south and what can be done to try to counter all of that. Not to insult the South, but anyway.
And we're going to start with the film.
Okay. And I think we should turn off at least the front set of lights.
Just to see my bedroom. Okay, we're blocking. We'll get out of the way.
Human Rights Watch has documented a large number of vicious attacks and aggressive harassment of LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people in Russia. It's happening in the context of the homophobic legislation that bans propaganda of non-traditional sexual relationships among minors. A vigilante group, Occupy Pedophilia, essentially uses the pretext of protecting children, of fighting pedophilia, to harass and attack gay people. They invite them for a fake date, and they proceed to berate them for their homosexuality, and in many cases to abuse them physically. They film all these proceedings and then post them on social networks, on YouTube, to humiliate the victim even further.
Люди считают, что человек ЛГБТ это не человек, и это игрушка, с которой можно вот поиграться просто. Идет человек по улице, а почему бы не ударить там его?
What we see in these videos are criminal offenses happening in the context of complete impunity.
Оно носит организованный характер, то есть эта группа действует по всей стране, они координируются через интернет, и в этом движении есть четкая идеология. Это неонацистская идеология. То есть надо четко понимать, с кем мы имеем дело. Мы имеем дело с фашистами, вот, которые избрали себе самую легкую жертву, это геи. Вот. И они этого уже не скрывают даже.
In one of the most egregious cases of violence that we have seen so far and documented, an Uzbek migrant was lured and abducted by a group who burned his clothes. They put a gun, or what looked like a gun, to his head, and they threatened him with violence and forced him to say that he is gay, that he regrets that he is gay. And then they handcuffed him, gave him a glass bottle, and what they asked him to do is to rape himself with that bottle. Almost every single demonstration for the support of LGBT rights and LGBT equality that happened last year was met with aggression, violence, attacks and harassment of LGBT activists. Police, on one hand, detained the LGBT activist, but on the other hand, there is a total failure on the part of the Russian law enforcement authorities to take active measures to prosecute hate crimes against LGBT people.
Сильный удар в лоб, после этого все спустилось под глаза, очень большие сильные отеки, один глаз вообще просто не открывался. Причем в полиции, когда я обратился, чтобы написать заявление, мне начали говорить сотрудники дежурной части о том, что это же все нормально, ты гей, как бы это нормально, то, что на тебя напали, зачем там вообще писать заявление, чтобы кого-то искать. Это нормально.
Russia should take active steps to investigate these homophobic crimes and bring the attackers to justice. It should also denounce publicly this violence and make sure there is zero tolerance to homophobic crimes and violence in Russia. And the Russian authorities should repeal the federal propaganda law, because it only inflates this type of violence. It only shows Russian people that LGBT community is second-class citizens in Russia, and that violence against them is normal.
Are you hearing okay?
Okay, I can do this. How about this? Okay. Logo. There's probably a magic way to do this. You know what I'm doing wrong.
That was something, yeah. You did it.
Hello?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Okay. Okay. Hello, hello?
Yes.
Is that working? Okay, great. Okay. Okay. So the same. And now I'm going to mess up his name. Al-Azadi. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. All right. He's the regional program coordinator for the Middle East and North Africa for the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. He speaks most impressive resume. He has a master's in international relations from the National University of Tehran. You guys?
No.
I don't think this is working at all. This is okay. No, the volume's all the way up. I don't
I hear that now.
it's just not natural.
All right, just project as much as you can, I guess.
Okay. It didn't change my
All right, I think we have to move.
Yeah, we're gonna move it. Okay, moving. Maybe we'll work it out eventually. Okay, anyway, so let me just say he's awesome.
I try to speak up so that without microphone we can.
1, 2, 3.
That's working.
Oh,
That's
working.
now. So see.
Okay, so you did it.
Sorry,
Here
missed
you
that
go.
part.
Yeah, it's okay.
So I hope you can hear me all, especially in the back of the room. So as Bob introduced me, I'm Hussein Aliza, the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission's Middle East and North Africa Program Coordinator. And really the topic that we are discussing today is so broad. Unfortunately, in my region, there is not a single country, in Israel, there's not a single country that recognizes the rights of the LGBT people. There are different degrees of rights violation. In certain countries you have death penalty, and then there are other countries where you have less severe penalties, up to 3 years, 5 years, countries like Morocco or Tunisia, and then you have in other countries where you really don't have any language in the penal code on LGBT issues. However, you do have a lot of moral codes that can be conveniently used by the government and the authorities against the community members. But what I want to emphasize today, and I guess this is going to be the focus of my conversation, is not necessarily the legal aspect, but the social/religious part of the conversation. Because I think that's such an important part that, at least in the Middle East and North Africa, is often overlooked when we address it from a Western perspective. For those of us who live in the West, often religion is an aspect of your life that is private. It informs your culture. It informs your culture, your social, perhaps, awareness, but it is separated from your political life. Whereas in the entire Middle East and North Africa, where you have a great deal of homophobia, religion is the centerpiece of your identity. I brought with me a copy of the new constitution of Tunisia that was just approved last month. I like this example because Tunisia seems to be the only country in the region that seems to be slightly moving forward rather than moving backward after the Arab Spring started in terms of the rights of the women and LGBT issues. They tried to negotiate, some sort of compromise between the religious parties. The ruling party is religious, and then the secular parties are very important and strong in the country. So they decided to negotiate sort of space in that country. So the current constitution is a compromise language, and it was held by many groups and organizations as progressive. But when you read this constitution, you see obviously that there are, at least every few pages, there's a reference to religion and Islam. It starts from the preamble of the Constitution that talks about, the teachings of Islam inspiring the Tunisian people, and then it goes to the Article 1 that talks about, Tunisia being an independent country and with sovereignty and Islam being its religion. Now that was a compromise language because in many other countries, like take the example of Morocco, they said we are a Muslim Arab countries, that's how the constitution starts. So that Islam is it precedes actually the Arabness, the ethnic and the linguistic identity of the individual. So this seems to be a compromise for them. And then it goes and talks about equality of men and women in different articles of the law. But then and then it talks about the rights to freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. My favorite one is Article 49 of the Constitution, which goes on and on and on. It says that all those rights and freedoms that we said, exist for Tunisian citizens are within the framework of culture, of traditions, of the morality of the society. So in a way, you say you have unlimited freedom as long as you don't violate any of A, B, C, D, and E, and F. And obviously, LGBT issues often can be framed as a morality issue. But also what is more troubling is in Tunisia, which is the example that I'm talking about, you still have a penal code, Article 489, that imposes up to 3 years of penalty for people who are involved in consensual same-sex relations. And that tells you that even though the society is trying to find a way to get away from traditional frameworks and references to religion, overlooking the entire society, you still are bound by the old view of sexuality and gender and what informs basically people's identity. And that is the major theme basically in the region, in every country that you go. And I think that that's something that many people in the West do not basically capture. We often say, oh, well, you have to, overcome that. But for many people, there is no way to basically talk about their sexuality without not mentioning the religious part of it. We had a training back in August in Turkey. We had a group of activists from Iraq. It was very interesting. These are all people that are very supportive of LGBT rights issues. But number one question in the minds of those people is how do we reconcile our faith with homosexuality, which is condemned in our religion. And often that's an issue that comes up quite a lot. And I know that in the West, out of political correctness,
we just keep encouraging people.
People stay away from discussing religion. This taboo is not allowed to talk. Even yesterday, when I was watching the whole Arizona fiasco, they said as long as it's based on your religious understanding, it's like, okay, so those people who blow themselves up is out of their religious understanding. So is that okay? It's just that's the kind of conversation we never get to have, because people don't really talk about, okay, what does that mean for you? Where does it start? Where does it end? Whenever the religion is the magic word, whenever people talk about religion, the conversations ends. And I think we have to move beyond that. We have to start challenging some of the notions that exist. Because when we talk about religion, it's not also one interpretation of religion. Again, going back to the experience here in the United States, we have a sort of a multicultural society. You have people from different religious backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, and you come here and sort of you go to your corner and you practice your religion, and I stay here and I'm doing my own thing, and religious freedom is guaranteed by the Constitution. So at least in theory you don't have state religion. Whereas in many countries you still have that. Even in Russia, the movie that we were watching, we have to keep in mind that Russia still have that religious flavor in the society, in the culture. You still have the Orthodox Church being very dominant. They walk around with diplomatic passports as if they are the government officials. So we have to understand that that is not a separable part of who they are and what they do. And that's the legitimizing part that basically allows people to go out and commit hate crimes against LGBT people. Because it is articulated to them as such that these people are committing a sin. And as such, they are violating, the rights of, the citizens and the rights of the God, and therefore they deserve punishment. Punishment, eternal punishment, and on this planet, you can do whatever you want to do with them. And in many countries, you have that that argument basically being very publicly pursued, you know, that this is the kind of view that we have about homosexuality. Now, the other side of the coin, what should we do about this? What is it that we can do? We can sit and talk about, okay, this is, you know, how we feel, and this is what in the West is happening, and so this is what you should be doing. And often, in my experience, that's how you end the conversation before it starts. Because people have sensitivities about, especially in a region like Middle East and North Africa, there is a history of colonialism not that long ago, you know, with a couple of wars happening, you know, started by the US government. So you always have that sensitivity about what the Western agenda is. So when you go there and that push for sexual rights or LGBT rights is pioneered by Western countries, you often hear people saying, so that's another stage of, you know, colonialism, new colonialism, that's how they understand the issue. Whereas you have to allow people to have a conversation among themselves. That space is so important. I feel that in many countries and cultures, people don't get a chance to talk about sexuality in general. That is so important because you cannot demand sexual rights for LGBT people in a society where heterosexuals have no rights. It's just ridiculous. People look at you and say, well, my marriage was arranged. I didn't have a chance to date anybody. My family decided who I was going to marry. So what are you talking about? And you cannot expect them to respect your space if they themselves have no space in their lives. So you have to go back and talk about sexuality in general and people's understanding of their own, the autonomy over their own body and how they feel about their own sexuality. Because, again, people want to understand that they have rights, period, whether they are heterosexual or homosexual. And also the issue of gender comes up. Men and women, equality, such an important argument. In many of those cultures, you still have the view that women are second-class citizens. So by that comparison, LGBT become third-class citizens. Whereas when you start talking about equality between genders, then you start a new dimension, a new discourse in the society. And it takes a long time for people to open up to these ideas. But we cannot just assume that by passing a legislation or some international pressure, you're going to change the cultural negative attitude about homosexuality. Because as I said, heterosexuality is not well understood in those societies. Sexuality is not allowed to be discussed in public, period. So really, how can you move things around? And it is not okay that every time that they hear homosexuality, it's in the form of some sort of a statement from some foreign governments. It should be a discourse within the society. It's not always a favorable thing. Sometimes it gets very nasty. But I think even the nastiness of the discourse helps people to understand because it allows people to take position, take sides. Some people are for it, some people are against, but that's how the society functions. And I think that that part is so important for having a social consensus on issues related to this topic. We have a video, it's only 1 minute and 50 seconds. I would like us to watch this, and before we start, I just want to explain. This is a video that we created for our Iran program. There are other stuff I'll talk about, but basically this was the out of month of conversation about how should we approach this issue for the Iranian audience. We wanted to talk about sexuality, sexual rights, human rights violation, all of that, but how should we communicate with them? So we realized that in Iran, people love poetry. They really, love, to talk, with euphemism and things indirectly and discuss this issue. So this is what we came up with. There is a Persian version and the English version. The version you're seeing is the English version. So let's start.
I have always been here, in the black and white of stories. always been here, in the black and white of stories. I have always been here, here, in the empty frame of pictures. I have always been here, in the hidden closet of poetry. In the broken crystal of moments. I have always been here, not in a pit, stoned to death, not on the gallows, not in death. I have always been here in life. Listen to the sound of my voice. Hear my call. Recognize me. I have always been here.
Big part of the conversation starts when you start challenging people to think about the injustice that's happening. If you start with sex, people walk away. They just don't like, impoliteness. Sex is a personal thing. I don't want to talk about it. When you talk about human rights, it's too political. Go home. I don't want to get arrested or anything. But when you talk about fairness, injustice, that this is me, this is your literature, this is your culture, this is your people. What about, what are you doing? That opens up a space for people to discuss it, to talk about it. And this is the kind of approach that we decided that works, for one of our program, Iran program, that we've been working for the past few years. A component of the program also had to do with reaching out to the media, to the culture, people who are main stakeholders within the cultural arena, to ask them to allow space for people to talk about these issues. So what we did, we realized that most people who are journalists, translators working in broadcasting business, they don't even know how to translate some of the terminology. Give you an example. We were working on a document. It's called Born Free and Equal. I'm sure many of you are familiar with it. This is a publication by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and it was published in 5 languages, the UN official languages. We decided to translate this into Persian, for our Iran program. So when we were working on it, we realized that in Persian the word consensual doesn't exist. When you talk about consensual same-sex relations.